Mr. Chairman, we're ready to begin.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning. I'd like to call to order the January 12th, 2021 Public Planning Committee to order. Teresa, have we complied with FOIA?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And Teresa, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Ms. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mr. Ames?
And I'm here also. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you very much. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand, please. Thank you very much. Teresa, were there any public comments?
Yes, sir. Public comments concerning agenda items were submitted electronically via the Open Town Hall portal. Those comments were provided to the committee for review and made part of the official record. In addition to commenting on the portal, citizens could call into the meeting to give public comments. However, we don't have any citizens on the call today.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the citizens who did submit comments to the portal. Appreciate that. The first item of unfinished business today is the review and recommendation on workforce housing bonus density LMO amendments. Staff, Jamie, would you like to comment, please?
Yes, sir. Good morning. We are going to revisit the workforce housing amendments. As you'll recall, they came to the Public Planning Committee in August of 2020. At that time, there was two components that we presented, and one was the commercial conversion, which allowed people to convert commercial space over to workforce housing, and the second was the density bonus initiative. As those went forward to the process on November 4th, Council voted to adopt only the commercial conversion related amendments and not to adopt the amendments related to the bonus density at that time. There were two main concerns for that, and the first was that the area of impact that we proposed and the overall potential for the increase in development levels was just too extensive for what we brought forward. And the second was that the allocation of the bonus units was too great compared to the resulting number of units needed we worked for workforce housing. So town staff did look into what we could do to possibly reconsider the bonus density initiative, and that's what we have before you today. So I'm going to share my screen for a brief presentation, and then I'll come back for questions.
Thank you.
All right, can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, we went back and tried to look at a smaller area, and so we started with our RM4 zoning classification. It's one of our lowest density residential zoning districts, allowing between 4 and 8 dwelling units per acre, depending on the size of the parcel. So we started with that and then looked at some larger size parcels so that we would have adequate area for buffers and setbacks and infrastructure. So we looked at a minimum of 3 acres. And then we looked at some additional location criteria to ensure it was in appropriate areas and environmentally sensitive areas were protected. So those criteria are along the lines of, we don't want them to have frontage on one of our creeks, Drivers Creek, Broad Creek, Old House Creek. We didn't want it in proximity to the airport, and we wanted them to be close to a minor arterial. That's what we started out to begin with. If you'll recall that we wanted workforce housing to be available near transportation and employment centers, so we wanted them to be in close proximity to a minor arterial where that would be available. And the last two criteria would be that lots within an existing legally platted single-family subdivision would not be available to participate. And then also properties that are developed for what would be deemed a permanent use. And those are things like Marshside and Marsh Point. Those are both large RM4 tracts, but they are developed for what staff would determine to be a permanent use, so they would not be eligible to participate also. Now, the only exception for an existing use would be a manufactured home park. We do have a couple of those out there in the RM4 district. And so if they met the location criteria and the size requirements, we did feel that redevelopment of an existing manufactured home park could be an improvement to the property. So we would like to consider those as being eligible to participate. Now, this is a map of the area. This is not something that will be developed. This is not something etched in stone. This is just a review that staff did of properties on the island that met the criteria. These properties are zoned RM4, they're 3 acres in size or more, and they met the criteria of not being close to the airport. They were in proximity to a minor arterial, not developed subdivisions, not developed parcels. So these are the ones that are there. It's about 30 parcels, totaling about 160 acres. That doesn't mean this is all the parcels. There could be some that slip through the cracks, and there could be some that people combine to meet the criteria. But this just gives you an idea of what will be available right now. For the density bonus incentive, we went back to a 2-tier approach. So parcels owners can apply for 2 different things. They can get up to 100% of their density bonus if 50% of the entire development is workforce housing units. So we use the example of a 3-acre parcel. In RM4, if you have 3 acres, the permitted density is 6 units per acre. So a 3-acre parcel would have 18 units per acre by 18 units by right. If they gave us 50% of the development as workforce housing, they could have up to 36 units if the 18 of those were workforce housing. Now, second tier is if they can have 50% of a density bonus if 25% of the entire development is workforce housing. So our same 3-acre parcel that allows 18 units by right would have 27 units if 6 were workforce housing. There is a cap on that the maximum density per acre is going to be 12 units per acre. And again, I want to emphasize that this is a voluntary program, that the parcels that were shown on there, it's not changing their parcel, it's not rezoning it, it's just adding the additional use to give them the opportunity to participate in the program. And again, if any parcels that participate in the program would have to comply with all aspects of the program, including our covenants, the agreement with the town, the income restrictions, all of that would still continue to apply to the density bonus properties. And lastly, the Planning Commission met on January the 6th and voted unanimously to forward this on to Town Council as presented for approval. And it would move forward to with the Public Planning Committee recommendation to Town Council on January the 19th. I will stop sharing my screen so we can come back. Stop sharing. Okay, there we go.
Thank you, Jerry.
I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah. Ms. Becker, do you have questions?
I do have questions. I guess I'll start with the manufactured home parks that would be allowed to redevelop as an exception. Would that redevelopment remain as a manufactured home park, or are there requirements for a different type of development, or would it just be an expansion really of the park?
For the manufactured home park, the intent was for it to redevelop into the workforce housing program. So they would have to comply with all of the restrictions of the income requirements and verifying that and filing the agreement and the covenants on the property and things of that nature. But we did not exclude manufactured homes from participating in the program.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, just for clarity there, and I don't know if this would physically be possible. So as it is proposed now, would a 3-acre parcel be able to have 36 trailers on it if it's participating in the workforce housing? I have to believe that 36 trailers on a piece of property would probably force it to be workforce housing. Anyway, so I don't know if that's an issue or not, but I know what Ms. Becker's pointing toward. At least I think I know what she's pointing towards.
Now that you've stated it better than I did.
Yeah, I mean, they would still have to comply with all the buffers, the setbacks, the infrastructure requirements. So if they could fit the 36 units on there, whether it be multifamily, townhouses, single family, or manufactured homes, they could participate in the workforce housing program.
Yeah,
So
I think it's almost a moot question. It's an interesting question because um, I have to believe that most trailers that are on the island are serving workforce employees and so on. So I think they're already in the workforce housing program. This would just allow them to get significantly more density if physically possible. What would the subdivision plan be for 36 trailers on a 3-acre parcel? Are you saying that each would have to be a dedicated lot?
No, they wouldn't necessarily have to do a subdivision. It could be considered a multifamily development.
Well, I appreciate your bringing it up, Ms. Becker. Thank you.
can I just have a quick follow-up to that? Are there any areas that could change from, that are not currently manufactured home parks, but that would comply with these rules and be able to change their development to a manufactured home park?
Manufactured home park is no longer a use within the LMO, so it would be considered multifamily, and any of the parcels that were highlighted and meet the criteria could participate in the program and could potentially utilize manufactured homes.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I guess several questions here. I guess I'll start with, I want to ask you this question first, Mr. Chair. I know that the affordable housing has been a goal of ours for a while now. I don't want to make the assumption that this is a continuous conversation. I want to be, certain that we will be putting forth every effort to continue the affordable housing conversation until we have gotten to a point where we're meeting our needs. Is that your take on it,
Yes.
Councilman Ames? Okay,
Yes, I think this is a baby step and heads us in a direction that allows us to appeal to the private sector to participate if it makes sense for them to participate.
Got it. Thank you. I guess my first question is, and I appreciate the work that you've done, Jamie, with this affordable housing. Are you going to be assigned to this so that we can have, I guess, a means of metric? I guess where I'm going with that is, if we approve these at the council level, is it going to be 12 months down the road, 18 months down the road, or somewhere, some type of evaluation of what we have passed thus far with this and the commercial conversion to say to council, hey, we've increased our affordable housing units by X, and we don't need to do any more, or we need to do more. Is that the intent?
Yes, sir. I will continue to be involved and monitor any applications for workforce housing that come in and track them and be able to provide reports to town council as needed.
How often do you plan on giving us those reports?
As often as town council would request. I don't know that we'll have activity, but it could be every 3 months. It could be every 6 months, annually. However often council would like it, I'd be prepared to provide those reports.
Sure. I just suggest that we do it as often as possible. This is a critical need here on Hilton Head, and we need to be responding and reacting as fit. So I just offer that up. A continuous report to us would be great. As far as the 3 acres is concerned, if there was an opportunity where individual owners were to assemble 3 acres, if I owned an acre, Mr. Stanford owned an acre, and Councilwoman Becker owned an acre, we wanted to come together and put it into 3 acres, would we then be eligible for this program?
If the parcels were combined, it has to be a single parcel of 3 acres.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And as far as I guess the RM8 district, which is not, of course, identified in this amendment, but I know that there may be tracts of this 3-acre significance in the RM8. How would we deal with that if someone wanted to develop the workforce housing around this criteria in RM8?
At this point, they would not be eligible because workforce housing is not permitted in the RM8. But that could be if the RM4 is something that's successful, that could be a secondary option down the road to look at adding the RM8 as the next step.
Sure. And this is not relevant to this discussion, Mr. Chair, but and for my colleagues, I just think that maybe this is something that we need to consider. I think we're in such a grave situation when it comes to affordable housing here on Hilton Head that we're not necessarily wanting to turn anybody away if they are willing to produce at a high level of affordable housing. So, maybe at our planning session, we need to talk a bit about maybe a expeditious process if someone comes forward and wants to do affordable housing, right? I just think that that's something that we're not used to doing, but in this case may be important and valuable in the future. That's the only other question I have is we're striving for affordable housing in somewhat of a single family type environment. And group living, I think, is a concern. Are we suggesting any safeguards against that?
Yeah, I appreciate your bringing that up after we've discussed this first amendment. Then I would be interested in having a conversation around the group living and perhaps even having a motion to amend the motion to include that. Thank you. Mr. Stanford?
Thank you. Jamie, first let me say that I appreciate the hard work that staff has gone through in this, particularly since you put a lot of work into it first time around, and we thought it was too big, and so you have accomplished what council requested you to accomplish, and I appreciate that. I agree that this is a first step, that there's no doubt if we start to get development in this area, that there will be changes in this program and it will be expanded. But I think this gives a lot of incentive to developers to come forward with this program. With that comment, I would ask if this program has been compared to the new 2021 9% tax credit program in the state to make sure that we haven't violated any of those very complicated rules. I've been told by developers that density is very helpful, but the 9% tax credit is the primary incentive. So the question is, does this in any way violate the rules and processes of those new procedures?
At this point, we have not evaluated that, but I will definitely do that before it appears before council.
I would urge you to set aside a fair amount of time. These are incredibly complicated rules that have been developed by the state. Apparently 9% developers, if you will, are used to that complexity, but it's complicated. And so I do think it's important that we make sure that this will in fact work under that program so that we not only have the density bonus, but we also have the availability of the 9% credit. So with that, I'll say again, thank you very much for a great job. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Glenn. Jennifer, you just popped up. Did you want to say something?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say that while staff hasn't necessarily gone through the whole QAP, we are aware of a developer that we've had conversations with that was going to be able to make that application work if town council took the action to increase the bonus density.
And Glenn, I may be oversimplifying this, but the state is responsible for the criteria to measure applicants against. And on Hilton Head, it has geographic ramifications. Some areas fall within the high-ranking criteria and others do not. So I don't think it's a matter of this prohibiting the potential or creating a potential conflict. It is more opening up a possibility that the 9% money would work on the island.
That's great. I just want to make sure that there's not some conflict that no one's identified yet. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Well, Jamie, I want to also thank you and John and Jennifer for responding to the council's concerns a couple of months ago. And I think you've done a good job in creating a platform for potential development of workforce housing. I have to add, though, that based on the knowledge I've accumulated over the last couple of years, that even this program with its density bonus is probably going to require some kind of participation beyond just this LMO amendment. And I think we should continue reminding ourselves as county councilmen and women to look at the opportunities of waiving impact fees, which require money to do, housing trusts, which make up part of the gap between the cost of building affordable housing and the rents that can be afforded. So I think this is a partial step towards solving the workforce and affordable housing challenges on the island. And so I again commend staff for their work on this. Now, before we get into a motion to move this forward to town council, I'd like to address the issue of dormitory within or not excluded from this program. And I don't know if you were prepared to speak to that, Jamie, or Jennifer was.
Staff has had a discussion about it, and currently dormitory isn't clearly represented under one of our uses. So if we were going to make it specifically a group living, which what we would technically ask it that it be, we would probably modify the definition of group living to make sure that it's included within there. And it is something that, as a separate use in the LMO, that could be excluded from participation in the program, whether as a whole or within a certain zoning district. So it's something that could be done if we wanted to exclude dormitory style use within the workforce housing program. Okay.
Ms. Becker, do you have any questions in that particular area?
Well, yes, and I have another question as well. My question with regard to group living and redefining it, and that is I'm not sure how an amendment to a motion could be made without having that specific information in front of us. So that is not something I believe I could go along with regard to any changes today. And secondly, I do have other concerns. There was a question as to whether or not 3 individuals or more could combine their individual lots to create a 3-acre parcel within the RM4 district so that they could take advantage of this program. when I hear the response that yes, that's a possibility, I would assume that each individual has to or would create an agreement among themselves, a multiple ownership of that land. But more importantly, what I am concerned about is we've seen a map, and while the map isn't being incorporated into this at this time, that open-endedness is troublesome to me. I don't know where those parcels are, and the last thing I would want to do is see something like that be able to move forward and to begin popping up in places that we hadn't contemplated. And as in part of that contemplation is the impact around those lots. So I don't think I could vote for this today with that piece of it.
When you say that piece of it, you're talking about the dormitory?
No, not only the dormitory, the idea of being able to combine lots. I mean,
Okay.
there's no security to anyone who's sitting here or listening or who resides in Hilton Head Island of what is being developed and planned for when we don't know where those lots are and we don't have any idea what those combinations of lots, those smaller parcels to fit into this program would mean to the surrounding area. I mean, it's just irresponsible to move forward with that within this this motion and moving this forward at this time. Take it out, but I'm not comfortable with it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, let me respond to Councilwoman's concern. Maybe maybe if I would have given a little bit more context to it. The 3-acre parcels that have been identified are not islands themselves. So they're right next door to, in some cases, potentially lots that would like to partake in the bonus density program. Okay, so I guess my suggestion was just that if I've got an acre next to a 3-acre lot and I can assemble with a few of my neighbors 3 acres and right next door to a lot that's already within the program, I think I should be availed that opportunity is what was my comment. And I think that because we have restricted the area with where it can be geographically, I think you are not going to have this popping up in areas that have not been identified thus far. So that was just my thinking when I brought that up.
Thank you for that clarification. It sounds to me as though what you have in mind is in your mind, and you have it pretty well spelled out. I don't necessarily see that explanation in something that I can understand at this point. And so I'd enjoy a further conversation perhaps with you or others who have been involved in that, but I haven't. And so I stand by my concerns as I presented them prior to your explanation, but thank you for that.
Sure. And
Alex?
I guess the only other question I have, I guess it's back to Jamie, going back to the ongoing updates. Do we currently have an inventory of our affordable housing broken down, single family, multifamily, dormitory, and so on? Do we have that information?
No, sir. Technically, there is no affordable housing program for the town, and there are no units that are technically within that. Now, I know Tom Barnwell does have properties that he has developed as affordable housing, but they're not in any type of program, so there's nothing for us to track at this point.
When the consultant did their study, were they able to identify?
I am unsure of that answer. I'm not sure if Jennifer has a response to that because I was not involved with the consultant, unfortunately.
I know that when Lisa was here, she did a lot of assessment and a lot of it came off of the Beaufort County assessment. But as Jamie said, just because there are people that are providing what's meeting a need for some affordable housing, they're not within the workforce housing program that the town adopted in the fall. So right now, there's nothing within that program. We can look to put together a list of projects on the island that are meeting that type of a need, but right now there's nothing within the program. What I would propose in terms of the metrics is that we let you all know, let council know every time a project comes into it, every application, and then also just give you regular, reports. But we'll let you know as soon as that first one comes in and any subsequent ones.
Okay. I don't know how my colleagues feel about it, but I think that we should expand not only to those that are going to be taking advantage of the current proposed programs, but those that are currently in effect also. It just helps us with making decisions down the road. It gives us a clear picture of what we're dealing with in terms of affordable housing versus market rate. Those that may currently stand as affordable housing that get converted into something else, it just helps us as we create code in my mind. So I humbly ask that we consider doing that. And that leads to my dormitory concern, right? Just because I know that there are several complexes on Hilton Head that are in that fashion, right? So a breakdown would be definitely helpful moving forward.
I think one problem with that would be this program has a specific percentage of AMI, there are requirements that you would meet to be in that program, and we wouldn't know just because it would be on someone to say if what they are providing is affordable or not, because they haven't gone through that sort of reporting with the town to be able to say that it's going to be the equivalent of what could be built under the program that you're contemplating today. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Because a lot of people say it's affordable, but it doesn't necessarily meet what we've called out for workforce housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I got to mull that one a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as far as the dormitory, do you understand enough of why we're doing that? How that would be a good move for the community, or do you still have questions about that, Alex?
No, well, I'm okay with it. Not being a part of this proposal, simply because I've been in those units, and I guess they serve a purpose to a degree, but I'm not quite sure that that's what the character that we're looking for on Hilton Head. Just the type of living in some cases is almost inhumane, I guess is where I'm going with it. All right. So I'd like to see us go in a different direction. I know we talk a lot about mobile homes, but I've been in mobile homes that are on the inside as warm and homely as you could ever imagine. Okay. But not necessarily the same when it comes to the dormitory type environment.
All right, thank you.
David, can I just jump in for a second? Because as we go down this road and we start talking about the judgment calls, look, I'm the first one to say that the inhumane living conditions in a small shoebox space is something that I also don't agree with. And there are a number of other factors that I think that we could start nitpicking through. One of the things that I think is important, quite frankly, is that we're starting, it sounds as though, at ground zero, when in fact on the island there are a number of areas, developments, subdivisions that are in fact providing rents and accommodations that fit within the AMI, maybe the definitions that we've created. And so when we start talking about how many numbers of units we need as a whole, we haven't established, or it doesn't sound from this conversation, like, sorry, we are having a rough morning around here. Hey, you too. A rough, established a starting point other than ground zero. So there's just an awful lot of confusion for me, and maybe I'm just not remembering things that could be pointed out to me that haven't that I'm not recalling at this point. But those, I assume those dormitory style ones that Alex is mentioning are like the ones over off Marshland and the ones that were created off 278 in the commercial building. They're serving a purpose. They were approved. I just think we're all over the place, and I'm gonna get off because I know where I stand on this.
All right, thank you. Glenn?
Thank you. Responding to Alex's comment about inventory, I agree that it would be very useful if in fact such a thing could be developed. But I hear staff concerns about what do you mean by this type of affordable housing. And so I would encourage you to think about it and see if you can come up with some sort of report back to council when this comes forward eventually. Then I would say, responding to Tammy's comments, we really need to get started with something. It's hard to visualize exactly how these things are going to be developed, but we've been battling this for 3 years, 2 years, a long time, and it's time for us to move forward. Anytime you start creating density bonuses, someone's going to object, but we have to balance here the needs versus the impacts. And so long as that impact is not severe, we're filling the need. And I think that the parameters of the program, as have been modified in this proposal, come very close to creating a reasonable structure for this to move forward. So I do support it at this time, recognizing that it's not perfect and wondering whether in fact there will be a sufficient demand from developers to actually start to meet these needs. Then on the subject of dormitory living, to me, dormitory, as we're using it here, is kind of a vague term. If you go into an Army barracks where there are 20 or 30 beds, that's a dormitory. Likewise, I think we're referring to a dormitory as a structure that is organized in pods, if you will. I'm thinking of the insurance building that J.R. Richardson redeveloped, where you have pods. I think it's 4 2-bedroom pods around a central kitchen. To me, those are totally different things, and we need to me, the success of that pod style living, if you will, proves that there's a demand for it. It seems to me to be a very close to ideal use for repurposing commercial structures. On the other hand, I would not be in favor of the Army barracks style of dormitory. So I think we've got some definitions that we need to come up with here. Think about it. We have homes on this island that have 6 bedrooms in them. They're single family homes. Is that a dormitory? I don't think so. And so that's why I get hung up in definitions here. So we've got some work to do before moving forward on it. I would favor the concept of the pods, as I refer to it, but I would be opposed to the concept of barracks type development that I also mentioned. So I think we've got some work to do on this, but I think we're thinking well about it. We're coming up with some ideas and hopefully stimulating staff to help us with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Can I
My
add to
concern,
that definition?
sure, of course.
Mr. Haynes, we, staff did look at a possible definition. Right now in the LMO, we already have a definition for group living. And if y'all wanted to take this up, we would propose adding dormitories where it says the uses would be group homes, assisted living facilities, dormitories, and similar uses. And then define dormitories as categorized as group living because they consist of a building or buildings which house students, employees, etc., and contain communal facilities and sleeping rooms with several beds. So it's not, one bed in one bedroom with one person in it. It's that usually in those examples, you see a bedroom that has bunk beds or several beds like you're describing in a barracks. And then to take that group living and go on with the restrictions that Jamie outlined earlier, with it being only an RM4, only 3 acres, saying that you cannot do group living to get the bonus. So staff's not saying that you shouldn't be allowed to do dormitories on the island. It's just that you can't get a bonus and then build that style of workforce housing. It might be appropriate somewhere, but not within the bonus density that we're talking about today.
That's helpful clarification on that. I would like to see that language in black and white as we're moving forward with these questions. Thank you.
I think all of this, if we were to move ahead with motions, we would have the opportunity to amend that action at full council. Let me speak to the dormitory issue. I've seen plans on this island where a single bedroom, not a large bedroom, would have 2 bunk beds in it. So there'd be 4 occupants in that room. If you begin to multiply that out on a 3-acre bonus density basis, you get significant numbers of people, upwards of 300 people in that small development. I don't think that's something that is tenable or that we should be promoting. So I feel strongly that dormitories, group living should not be a part of this program. With regards to the broader bonus program, I think we have to be realistic. The private sector is going to assess whether or not they can develop property on Hilton Head Island, relying 100% on the LMO amendment that we're proposing today. I don't think they can, but I think it opens the door for more productive conversations around what we as a town and what the government beyond our town have to do in order to actually implement a viable and effective affordable housing, workforce housing program. I think this is a part of the solution, but not 100%. So I am in favor of moving this forward to council today and amending that amendment with the dormitory language. I asked staff to provide a motion for the dormitory that I would like you to consider. I move that the Public Planning Committee approve the Workforce Housing LMO amendment related to bonus density as presented by staff with the following considerations. Modify the definition of group living to include dormitories and add a condition that properties in the RM4 district developed for group living use are not eligible to participate in the workforce housing program. So I think the first motion that is before us is whether or not, the motion is to move our recommendation forward to council regarding the bonus density program as prepared by staff.
Was that a motion, David, or was it you asking for a motion?
I was asking for a motion, Glenn. Thank you.
So moved.
Is there a second?
A second.
All right, thank you. If there is no further conversation or discussion, Teresa, would you call the roll on that motion, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Becker,
No.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mr. Ames.
Support.
Motion carries 3-1.
Thank you. Is there a motion as I specified with the dormitory? I can reread it if you care.
I would move the amendment as described by the chairman.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, Teresa, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Becker,
No.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Stanford,
For the motion.
Mr. Ames.
Support.
Motion carries 3-1.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the review and discussion on Historic Neighborhood Overlay District. Is there a staff presentation on this topic? Therese, I see you. Thank you.
There's not a presentation, but I'd just like to bring everyone up to date on where we are in terms of how we got here. Starting with the Gullah Task Force, which was created in 2017, and there are a couple of goals that they were working towards, and this is to preserve the topics of heirs property, property taxes, and land use under preservation. And the second was the economic sustainability. As we know, the town hired a consultant in 2018 to create a report of recommendations that fell under those three topics of land use, of heirs property, and of preservation. And so what has occurred since then is that Town Council approved 37 recommendations along with a framework of the top priority projects, beginning with the Historic Overlay District, which we've been working on. Staff has been working on that since the beginning of 2020, and of course, COVID kind of derailed things. So we were able to pick up again with the task force, and we had meetings this summer in July and September, and they voted to move the amendments forward that are associated with the overlay district. And what we're doing is staff has worked on these amendments to create flexibility, creative site planning to honor families, and increase density for impacted areas. And the meeting held on the overlay district that was held also moved forward to the LMO committee, which met in September, and they made their recommendations before voting to pass this on to the public, to the planning commission, who met in October. And so what you have before you is what the Planning Commission has decided on. And staff understands that there's some concerns with the size and focus area and increased density. So right now what we're doing is we're looking for PPC recommendation or direction in how to proceed.
Thank you, Sharice. I'd like to make a couple of comments. Because I heard the public's reaction to the extent of the area that was being considered. Hold on just a second. But I've been working closely with the Native Island community also to create a pathway for economic sustainability. And I think we have to be, well, a couple things come to mind. One is that the broader community of Hilton Head on a daily basis probably isn't confronted with some of the issues that we're talking about today regarding the overlay district. So I think there is a broad educational program that's necessary to bring the entire community up to speed on what we're trying to accomplish. And a goal that we have talked about is to preserve the presence of Gullah people on the island and through them connections to their historic culture. I think it's important for us to answer the question, why is this goal important to the island? And again, I think the understanding of this and the support of the broader community depends on it. But I would add that it's not just an LMO amendment that will preserve the presence of Native Islanders. It also depends on their earning enough money to stay. Gullah assets are largely tied up in the value of their lands, and that potential value relates in part to zoning, but growing assets is also dependent on access to capital, business and development expertise, and contacts. And so economic sustainability depends on more than zoning and land use flexibility. So we are talking about one part of the equation to meet that goal of preservation of Gullah people on the island and economic sustainability. But I also believe, and I think others share this, that there are barriers to our getting to that goal. It's important to understand that it's probably obvious to those of us who have been working on this over time. There are differences between the Gullah and non-Gullah attitudes and values as expressed in their reactions to land use restrictions and nonconformities and area planning. Flexibility, the individual choice, versus zoning, the community standard. Plus, the suspicion on the part of the Gullah, I would say the normal fears of a minority, and the lack of awareness and in some cases sensitivity on the part of non-Gullah residents. There's a public concern over the land included in earlier proposed overlay and densities assigned within the overlay. The fear is excessive unplanned development. I personally believe that the location and justification of higher densities rest on a land use and master planning, and in some cases, in many cases actually, that master planning hasn't been done. The public concerns over uses which may be permitted in the overlay and noxious activities that may result. And we've been talking about what those noxious activities might be and the levels of concern over different types. And I think that's something that we need to come to grips with. And then the obvious point of conflict are the boundaries between, in some cases, Native Island property owners and the desire for flexibility, and a non-Native Islanders residents being in a quote-unquote planned or even gated community. So there are those questions. So I think where we are today is trying to figure out some of those things that underpin the viability of this program. And having said that, I'd like to give members of the committee an opportunity to share their thoughts of where we are, what we ought to be focusing on, and then try to move forward with a more focused discussion. Ms. Becker, do you have comments, thoughts?
Sure. I went first last time, so I'm going to hand my time off at this point to one of my colleagues, and they can begin as I look
Okay,
for that
we'll go in
order.
reverse order. We'll go in
That would be,
reverse order.
that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Mr. Stanford.
Thank you. I too see a need for this type of amendment. But like everyone, I'm concerned about opportunities for abuse. I am concerned that a piece of property within the overlay having the relaxed regulations dealing with density, setbacks, etc., could be developed accordingly and then flipped to someone else. The idea is to protect the value of this community for its residents. And here we're talking about for the benefit of the Gullah residents. So I see a risk there, and I want to make sure that we have sufficient safeguards to prevent abuse. Sharice, I heard you mention heirs property. I don't
Yes,
see
sir.
this as a way to cure heirs property issues.
No, it wouldn't be.
Yeah, I'm a retired lawyer, so I understand something about land titles and something about the requirements that lenders would have to finance things, and you have to have clear title. And so while it would be nice to have some expedited way to cure and resolve heirs property issues, I can't imagine what that would be. First of all, it's a matter of state law, and it's not a matter that we can change. And then you have the practical utility of that having to do with lenders' requirements about good title and so forth. That being said, specifically in the case of family compounds, if I recall correctly, we were talking about being in the family for just a few years. The county regulation requires it to have been in the family for 50 years. To me, that is much more in the nature of a family ownership and family attachment to the land over a shorter period of time. I understand in a discussion with staff that there's been talk about maybe tying that to the year 1956 when the first bridge was built. That makes some sense, I think, except that as time goes by, and believe me, at my age, I know time goes by rapidly, that time could get to where it was too long in a few years. And so we need to think about that seriously. I know that there's been a lot of work, good faith work put into this. And so I'd like to see how we can evolve it to meet some of these questions and concerns that are being expressed here today. So a nice job by the task force, a nice job by you, Sharice. Thank you for your efforts in this regard. Thank you, David.
All right, Glenn. Mr. Brown.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Du Bois, for the work that you've put forth thus far, along with the task force. I know it's been a long time coming. You brought back memories when you mentioned the year 2017 as when we got started with this. But I probably want to go back a bit further. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Ames, but I think the RUDAT study was 1995, maybe? Yeah. Okay. So, we've been at this for a long time now. I feel very confident and comfortable that we've gotten to this place where we are truly considering writing code that will help preserve the Gullah presence on Hilton Head. And if you will just bear with me a moment, I'm going to give credit and steal from Dr. Emory Campbell at the same time. And, he says to me that preserving the Gullah culture isn't any different than it was back in the 1800s, where Gullah folks are simply looking to sustain themselves on their land in perpetuity. Now, we've seen a lot of changes around us. Development has kind of pinched the Gullah way of life here on Hilton Head. And I think we've gotten to a point with previous councils approving the goal of preserving the culture, that we have to have an attitude of thinking outside of the box in order to get into some type of resolution here. So I think some of the definitions that we have before us, like the family compound, they need to be tightened up. I like the idea of some legalities around the actual folks that we are trying to preserve and protect here. I'm looking at my chart of the historic Gullah neighborhoods, and according to these numbers, we got about 2,500 acres. 1,000 of those acres are owned by Gullah Geechee, and more importantly, the parcels. Out of 3,000 parcels, there's only 900 some odd parcels owned by Gullah folks, right? So we're talking about a third of the parcels in that area. So we can narrow down and get focused on just those parcels. I think we'd be in a better place. And also, as we narrow down to those parcels, be as close to 100% sure that what we are putting forward is going to serve some relief for the individuals. Just picking up on some of the opening comments that the chairman made, yes, we're going to have conflicts, absolutely. But it's no different than the conflicts that have already been absorbed to a degree. And I'll use myself as an example. Well, maybe not myself, maybe I'll use my mom here. You don't know how many times my mom complains to me about the kayakers that kayak through Broad Creek almost up into our backyard. Now, I have to say, well, Mom, we are a resort destination, and the waterways are public, and folks are going to enjoy them. And she said, but my view, I've been so used to just looking under that oak tree and seeing nothing but marsh. Well, to a degree, she feels as if that has affected her quality of life. And maybe it has. But we've absorbed that. She's not picking up the phone trying to write code to stop people from kayaking. She's not picking up and saying, we need to move out of here. We've absorbed that, understanding that's just a part of what happens when you're in a place called paradise. And the Gullah culture is a huge piece of that paradise. So I feel like we're going in the right direction. I feel like we need to embrace flexibility. We need to embrace differences. I'm going to say that again. We need to embrace differences, because that's just part of what has happened here on Hilton Head. And no one should be punished because there's a difference. So, it would be my suggestion that we take what's before us, boil it down to these 922 parcels, pick some prominent families within these historic neighborhoods, try these proposals on for size, see if we're really hitting the nail on the head, make adjustments where need be, and then bring back something that we can easily swallow and move forward. So those are my comments at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, Tammy?
So while I think the idea of preserving everyone's rights is important, and while I believe truly that differences make us a whole, I think it's the whole that is the focus of government, and therefore what the accommodations are for the whole should be fair. In the case of where we are today, we're looking at separating out and distinguishing and separating land for specific use based on differences that aren't consistent across the island. I think pulling out and spot zoning, as this would be, as it was just described, and then the property next door owned by someone else without those differences having to remain under different rules is not consistent with how I see a community working as a whole. So there, beyond that, this is one island. I keep hearing it. I believe it 100%. This is one island. So different rules for different parcels of land doesn't seem like a one island concept to me. Equal opportunities to develop properties are important. Some of the consequences, though, right? And I live in a world of consequences, as I know Hilton had with regard to some planning that took place. I appreciate Alex's comments with regard to his mother's view being trespassed, perhaps, by folks using the public waterways and the kayaks. I remember buying a piece of property and within short order having the land around me developed so that my ocean view and those of my neighbors was distorted and taken away. So I understand how things happen. And I live with that too. I've absorbed that as well. The idea, though, in this document has been that there are large swaths of land that would affect many people. And one way that they would affect them is in the land use with regard to business occupation. And I think that is something that remains a tremendous problem and needs to be addressed. And quite honestly, is unfair to those surrounding neighbors who also have been here for maybe not the same historical nature, but for many years in established neighborhoods. And that I see as a problem. So the idea of respect and one island and providing opportunities for everyone is, I think, a justified and a worthy goal to attain. But by doing it, by singling out people and making it different for some than others, and then the consequences of some of that for the whole is bothersome. So that's really all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. This is a thorny issue that really begins to beg the question, what a majority population has to do when it recognizes that a minority population has been overwhelmed by the majority population's value system. And I don't want to get too philosophical about this, but I am reminded of how American Indians were treated, and I also recognize that there have been many court cases that have recognized those injustices and provided means for economic sustainability through that court action. I philosophically and morally and temperamentally believe that the Native Islanders' culture, land ownership, and opportunities have been overwhelmed by the explosion of development, outside capital, capabilities, and interests of people who have come to the island. And so I am challenged to figure out what is fair in recognizing what has been done to that population. At the same time, I recognize that as population density increases in an area like our island, the choices of the individual become constrained by necessity in some cases, by laws in other cases. And so I recognize that some of the hopes of being able to do what one used to do changes as the neighborhood changes. I don't know what the ultimate resolution of this challenge is, but philosophically, I think that we need to come to grips with what we as a community can do to help Native Islanders whose assets are primarily confined to their land. How that land can be monetized in a way that they can sustain their living on the island, and do it in a way that meets the broader goals of the island, but recognizes the individual cases that are before us. So, having said that, I think that we recognize that the original plan touched too much property, was not confined primarily to the Native Islander Gullah Geechee on the island. And so we are thinking about how we reduce that impact. One prospective opportunity is what the county has done, and that is a definition of ownership. And so I think one thing this committee ought to do is ask staff to research a definition of ownership and the legality of such, so that council can consider that as one possible solution. If that were to be legally defensible, then a significant step in the direction of providing flexibility to Native Islanders could be taken. I think that Alex made the comment about seeking out the feedback and opinions of a group of Native Islanders specific to their property, so that council understands what it means on a specific piece of property. I think this would give us as council a better understanding, a less abstract understanding of what we're really talking about. So I would say that would be the next thing that we should ask staff to do. If we I think defining geographic boundaries is probably important from emphasizing the historic nature, but it may also be some sort of legal requirement. So I would say staff would have to be somehow tying it to areas of the island, but I'm not clear in my head if that's necessary, because if the ownership trumps it, that may be enough. If we get to the point where we can define ownership in a way that we have narrowed the audience, then the family compound, family subdivision come into play. But I do believe that the challenge here is the notion of incompatible land uses at the boundaries. If you have a neighborhood with 100% Native Islanders, that's one thing. They have a tradition where home occupation is acceptable and necessary. It's at the boundaries. So I do believe that we have to think about, and I would ask staff to wrestle with what are the acceptable and unacceptable activities on adjacent properties, and is there a ranking of acceptability or unacceptability? I go back to what I said a few minutes ago. What might have been acceptable 40 years ago when the nearest property owner was 500 feet away may not be acceptable today when that property owner is 100 feet or 50 feet away. So I think we have to be realistic in what is acceptable and what might not be. But I would ask staff to give that thought. And then lastly, and I appreciate, Charisse, the draft that you provided, the community message. I think that's well done. I think this outreach to the broader community of what we're trying to accomplish and the benefits thereof is something that we ought to be doing in the future. So those are specific areas that I think we should ask staff to move on. If there are others, please weigh in, but then have staff come back to us with that information for our next public planning committee meeting. But those were my thoughts. I welcome committee staff. Glenn?
Thank you. I'm concerned about the use of the term ownership as you mention it. Again, from a legal point of view, ownership means legal title. I don't have any problem recognizing that a piece of property that has been in a family for generations and has been passed from one member to the other without a will or the administration of an estate to legally pass the title, I don't have any problem with saying that family owns that property, but they don't own it in the sense of a legal title.
Thank you.
That's where my concern is about the availability to find necessary financing in order to do development in those properties so that it can be done on a quality basis. Like you, I am concerned about, as you refer to it, boundaries. To me, it means adjacent properties. We need to have a sufficient buffer if we're going to allow more intense development on certain properties than we allow on the adjacent properties. But I think that we're starting to move down the tracks towards getting some creative ideas. I'd be interested. I frankly didn't know about the county came up with a new term for ownership. I'll be interested to see what that is. But those are my practical concerns about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, I get Glenn. Can you help me out a little bit? You lost me a little bit on the ownership piece. I don't know, maybe I'll do better with an example. Because what I was understanding is more of an heirs property type environment with passing the property down. But when we talk about ownership, I guess I'm just trying to follow your concern there. In a different scenario where it has been transferred legally, but to individuals that have, I guess, a lineage back to the original ownership. Does that make sense? I guess I got lost somewhere along the ways with your
Well,
concern.
I'm sure I wasn't clear because I'm thinking without or speaking without necessarily thinking it through, I suppose. But in the case where there has been a legal transfer
Mm-hmm.
through an estate, there's no question in my mind that there can be good title to those properties.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the case where there has been no legal transfer, rather than just a physical transfer, what I was trying to say is that in my mind, even though legal title is confused, that family has ownership of that property.
Mm-hmm.
And that is worthy of preservation, but I don't know how practical it is to allow any additional development on it for the title issues that I was talking about.
Got it.
And
Okay.
so I understand the traditions about the property going on to family members when the current occupant dies. I understand how that happens. I regret that it happens because it's frankly not that difficult to transfer a legal title. But as a matter of fact, that's the way it's happened. I understand. And so we've got to balance those two things. That's all I was trying to say.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I guess I got a question for staff. In the summary report, it mentioned that there was, I don't know, $100,000 that was asked for implementation. Is that money still available?
We would actually have to look into what's in the budget for this year.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that question is because I know that like the chairman said, we need to have definitions in front of us that can be defended, right? So I know that 100K was put aside so that we could deal with legalities, potentially, produce, I guess, material that would offer up maybe some visuals and that sort of thing. I guess where I'm going with this, Chairman, is that we encourage staff to be very aggressive in their findings, okay, with the conversations that they're having with the families and with the attorneys, and really put some excitement around these proposals, okay, because for 30 years it's been a fight, and it shouldn't be a fight anymore. I'd rather us put this together as opportunity, okay, and I think that there can be some money well spent in trying to go in that direction. All right. So I just offer that along with all of the other direction that you've given thus far, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. What comes to mind immediately when you're talking that way, Alex, is that you and staff probably ought to get together and decide what what is the way to have a productive conversation with family interests to do this intentional involvement that you mentioned earlier, and then have that the results of those conversations come back to the Public Planning Committee. The Public Planning Committee can then make the recommendation to council if money is necessary for that issue or for the legal issues that you referenced.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Ms. Becker?
I don't really have any further comments. I think that the goal and the intention of where we're heading with regard to preserving the Native Island Gullah community on the island is time well spent. I think it's important to the overall history of our island. I am encouraged, but I'm also concerned. My overall view of life is that we are all equal. We are all the same. I love the one island community. And when we start separating out certain parcels in terms of being different, if it has consequences for everyone, doesn't move us forward. So I hope someday everything is smooth, culture is created and preserved, our history is cherished and celebrated, and we can all see what's taking place today with all of what we're discussing has been well thought out, honestly discussed, and that it has served a purpose that is beneficial to everyone, so that we truly are one island and one community. Thanks.
Thanks, Tammy. I'd like to add a thought. I see this challenge as being a significant opportunity for this island to become one island. This is not an unusual or rare circumstance where a minority population has been overwhelmed by a majority population. But how does a community respond to that? How does it mold a solution that preserves that minority population so that it has self-respect and opportunity and is acclimating into the broader community in a way that is beneficial to both, to the whole community? So I think that I see this as a way for Hilton Head Island to stand tall and stand out. So I think this is something that, if we succeed, will benefit not only our population, but be a model for a much, much broader population. So again, I'm trying to figure out a way that we look at this in an unusual, a rare, a different, a unique, an outside the box, whatever you want to say, way that gets us to a point where we truly have accomplished the notion of one island, one community. So having said that, I don't know if we need a motion or just consensus that we are going to ask staff to define and understand what this ownership question is, and notwithstanding Glenn's comments, that we are going to create a pathway for involvement by Native Islanders to assess a sampling of ownership circumstances. And third, to deliberate on the levels of acceptable activity within those well, broadly speaking, but also apply those that activity list to those examples that are being discussed and planned. And then last, Charisse, is the educational component, community messaging, and so on. I have some thoughts on that. I would welcome certainly the committee's thoughts on it. I just received this committee this morning. I'll send it out to you so that you see it. But again, it is somewhat the beginning of a statement to give the broader population of the community on our website, on the town website, an understanding of what is driving this conversation and why we're doing it. Have I missed anything, committee? Yes, Glenn.
I'm not sure you said it, but we've all said one way or another that we need to more tightly define the properties that are included in these considerations.
Yes.
It's going to be difficult to do because an overlay by nature, I think, has to go over a district, not over a particular property. And so that's going to be a challenge to us to move it forward, but I think it's important to do exactly that. Other than that, I think your challenge to the staff, the committee, and the community is right on the mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I think you mentioned that we were looking to report back at the next PPC meeting.
Yes.
Would that be in February?
Yes. That's what
Okay.
I anticipate. Right. Yeah, the next
Yes.
PPC, I'm glad you clarified. The next PPC meeting, I believe, is on the 21st, but that will be discussing other matters.
Okay.
Thank you. If there is no other business before us, let me make sure that there isn't. We have no new business. Teresa, any staff reports?
No, sir, none at this time.
No other committee business. Well, I will adjourn the meeting at this time and thank everybody for their comments and also their participation. Thanks very much.
Good job.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.